Thank you. Thank you. Morning. Good morning. Good morning. What a great crowd. How about that Joe? I said, I heard him, you heard him, and on November 2nd, 2010, the people in this state and this country will hear Joe the plumber yet again. You know, Joe said something that reminded me of a story. About a week after the election last November, I had the good fortune to speak in front of a group of folks who were kind of licking their wounds after the November elections, and it was kind of interesting. There were three people that morning: the Attorney General from Virginia, who's running for governor this year, the Secretary of State from Michigan, who's one of a handful of people running for governor in Michigan next year, and then I was the wrap-up speaker. And right before me, the Secretary of State got up and she talked a little bit about who she was and what she was doing, and she said something really quite remarkable for this group of conservatives. She said a week after the election, she pointed out to this crowd that, well, you know, we really got beat up last week, and she said maybe it's time to broaden the tent and change our message. Well, just like it would have in this group, that went over like a lead balloon. And so I got up and I'd explain a little bit of who I was, where I came from, a Republican in a very dark blue county. And that I had cut taxes or held the line of taxes for 7 straight budgets and got reelected and reelected after that. And then I got to the end, and because she was still seated there, I didn't want to directly go after her, so I said, you know, a lot of pundits say that we conservatives should change our message. And I want to tell you, just like I'll tell you again today, I fundamentally disagree with that. There is nothing wrong with our message. Unfortunately, there's been too much wrong with our messengers. Now, as much as John McCain is a good American hero and a great servant to our country through his military record, John McCain was not the right messenger. In fact, I dare say that Joe the plumber had a better message for the economy than John McCain did. In fact, I think anyone who doubts that, just look back in time. I think back to 1979, 30 years ago. Jimmy Carter said we were in a malaise in this country. And one man, a great messenger, but more importantly, someone who believed in the message, Ronald Reagan, stood up and he said, you know what? This is America. We can do better. And he took a message of limited government, lower taxes, and personal responsibility, and not only won in November of 1980, he won after that by taking that message directly to the Congress, directly to the people. And from 1983 on, through the end of the decade when his tax cuts were fully enacted, this country saw the largest peacetime economic boom in history. We need to remind the media, we need to remind the public, we need to remind the Congress and the legislature and everyone else who's willing to listen that that economic recovery brought us more than 20 million new jobs and more than 5 million new businesses because Ronald Reagan believed in the American dream, and more importantly, he believed in the American people. Today, we need that message more than ever. More than ever. Right here in Wisconsin, we have the largest deficit in state history, the 4th largest deficit in the country, and Jim Doyle's answer is to go from raiding other funds to raiding raiding the federal government bailout fund to the tune of $2.5 billion. On top of that, at a time when we're losing jobs and people all across the state, he's asking the people of this state to pay more than $2.1 billion worth of new taxes in this budget. Does anybody think that's going to get the economy going again? We can do better. We have an agenda of hope and optimism for the future. I think back to when I grew up, not here in Milwaukee County, but I grew up down the way by the state line in Walworth County back in the 1980s. And we had a similar time in the early 1980s where we had a large deficit in the state budget brought on by a national recession, and we had Tony the Taxer, Tony Earl, who was in charge of government. The Democrats were in charge of the Assembly. The Democrats were in charge of the Senate. And instead of lowering taxes, controlling spending, doing anything else, they said, no, the way to balance this budget is on the backs of the taxpayers here in the state of Wisconsin. And thankfully, a man from Elroy stood up and said, you know what? This is Wisconsin. We can do better. And he did, and he took that same message that Ronald Reagan talked about of limited government, lower taxes, personal responsibility, took it right to the people of this state. And he not only won in November of 1986, in the 1980s and into the early 1990s, he won again for Wisconsin. Tommy Thompson brought us back. I believe we can again, because if not, remember what happened before Tommy came in? Things were so bad because of those tax increases. So bad, I remember this growing up right near the state line, that Jim Thompson, the governor of Illinois at the time, one of the few who's not been indicted, I might add, Jim Thompson put up billboards. And you remember what those billboards said? When the last business leaves the state of Wisconsin, do what? Turn off the lights. Well, we're not going to turn off the lights in Wisconsin. We can do better, but we need to stand up and tell the legislature and the governor it's time to take our state back. It's time to not rely on the federal government for bailout funds. It's time to rely on innovation and reduce spending and more of the will of the people and not of the will of the government. If we do that, we can make this state great again with your help. God bless you, and thanks for coming out.